Hey out there, welcome to today's Search Engine Journal webinar. Hope you're having a great day. So happy that you have chosen to spend this time here with us. And so I am joined by Will Critchlow, CEO and founder of Search Pilot. Hi, Will. Thanks for joining us today.
Hi, Heather. Thanks for having me on the show. I'm very much looking forward to this one. And yeah, thank you everyone for joining us.
Yeah, I think everybody who's joining us and who's just coming into these doors is going to be super excited about our content today. So we are going to be talking about ways to secure your budget. Will is going to give you some tips to help you get executive buy-in. So we just launched our state of SEO report, and one of the biggest challenges SEO professionals are facing out there today is getting that executive buy-in, showing that value of the SEO efforts that you're putting forth. So Will is going to give you some great tips, and let me go through some quick housekeeping. That way we can get to those. All right, so first, if you experience any technical difficulties, use the chat box, let us know. We have Christina in the background helping out today, so she'll get you those answers. We also have closed captioning, and so that's little CC in the top right of your screen. Give that a click. And we're going to be taking questions following the presentation. And with this webinar, we've also, Search Pilot is going to do a breakout room. So in that breakout room is going to be Emily Potter, their VP of customer success over at Search Pilot. And she's going to be giving you a demo and going a little more in depth on some of the tools that they have. So with that, we're going to answer as many questions as we can at the end of the presentation. We have a little function. If you give it a thumbs up, if you see a question that you like, we try to front load those and make sure that we ask them because we realize how important they are to you. So if you see something, give it a thumbs up. We'll know that we need to ask that with Will. And then after the webinar, if you can stick around, we have a short survey. It lets us know how today's webinar went for you and what we can do in the future to make them maybe a little bit better. And so the question that we absolutely get asked the most, and as I always say, we will answer it every time you ask, you will 100% receive today's recording, the slides, and any resources in your inbox later today. So be on the watch for that. I've said a lot of words. I'm going to get out of here. Will, it's all yours. I'll be back at the Q&A.
Thank you ever so much. All right. Hi, everyone. And thank you for this. So I wanted to kick off today by giving you, well, 3 reasons why you might want to listen to me on this subject, and a bonus reason why maybe you might not. And we'll see how those balance out against one another. And so first of all, I wanted to show you this chart. So this is the last, however many years, few decades of the stock market growth. And you can see a few kind of dips in this this timeline, and there's some pretty important ones to me. So just right here is when I left college, and I had to go hunting in the job market that followed that, and that was my kind of early career experience, was operating in that that kind of tough financial environment. And then this next one right here was when we launched our conference business. So some of you might have heard of Search Love, which was the conference business that my previous company Distilled ran, and that was when we ran our first in 2009. And then the final point is actually just before the drop. So just before the COVID experience hit everyone was when we launched Search Pilot as a standalone business as it spun out. So these are the 3 reasons of why I have experience operating in these kind of tough economic times. And in each of these times, I've had to really focus and think about how we frame things in a way that businesses care about, executives care about, clients or customers care about, and how we operate in all of these kind of places. And obviously, changing times, different experiences. But yeah.
Hey, Will, I'm so sorry to interrupt, but your connection seems to be a little choppy and your video's frozen. So if you can.
I am on a wired connection, and let me.
You know what? Christina's going to give you a quick refresh so it'll kick you out. You'll just have to come back in. Okay, cool. Thanks.
Sure thing.
And it'll only take a second for Will to come back in. If I thought it was going to take longer, we would ask Christina to sing like a little song for everybody while we're on hold. But in the meantime, we do have the chats. Oh, that was really fast. Perfect.
Okay, I'm making sure that I'm on the wired connection, and hopefully everything's going to work smoothly here. So fingers crossed. So sorry that it's been a little bit choppy, and yeah. Well, anyway, hopefully this screen kind of shows you what I was talking about, which is basically I have a ton of experience in the different tough times over my career, and that hopefully we can learn from all of this stuff together. So I'm still getting some warnings that it's choppy. Is it working okay now? Can you hear me all right?
Right this second you seem to be in, but it is going in and out.
I could try turning my camera off for a minute. And yeah, my connection should be fine. So okay, let's see how we go. Okay, so these were the reasons why you might want to listen to me. And I promised one reason you might not. And that is all buried in this chart, which looks quite similar, but this is not the stock market. This is actually the last couple of decades of the price of platinum. And why is this important? Well, this is important because right here, right at the very top of this spike, is where my wife and I bought our platinum wedding rings. And we could have waited a couple months because the wedding wasn't actually until late 2008. And so we could have bought right down the bottom of that price chart. So I guess what I'm saying is you might say, Will, it's just that your timing sucks. And I'm not going to listen to you after all. In which case, fine, I'll let you get on with your day. But let's get to the meat of things now and start talking about budgets, SEO, and executive buy-in. So the problem is that in the market that we're talking about right now, where we've worked through these different things, basically your CFO is feeling a little bit like an armadillo, and that if you don't treat them very, very carefully, then they're going to do this and kind of pop into a ball and keep out all the predators and all your budget requests. And so let's talk about how we can operate to think this through. So these three historic tough economic times that I mentioned, so in that 2002 post.com bubble kind of era, it was a little bit of a different experience in my experience because the internet was just so small back then. We forget how much the internet has changed, has grown, and has taken over our lives. And similarly, COVID, that 2020, 2021 era, was just this whiplash of things changing in our lives, but also in our economic world. And so actually what we're in right now, this kind of period of uncertainty, a little bit of slowdown in some places, job uncertainty in some places, and budgets being put on pause or cut, feels to me most like the fallout to the global financial crisis, that kind of 08, 09 kind of era. And we can see this. So this chart shows the spend on TV advertising and on digital advertising over the last couple of decades. And what's really interesting is that we actually see digital spend didn't ever go down during that time period. It actually flatlined. And I think that's probably the biggest kind of metaphor and experience for what we've been experiencing since maybe Q4 last year, is we just see a lot of uncertainty. We see a lot of businesses saying, we do want to do this project, but we want to start it in next quarter, next fiscal year, whatever it might be. Budgets get stretched, paused, delayed, pushed out, those kinds of things. And so this is the context of where I'm kind of bringing some of those learnings from and some of those experiences. And so over the last few months in particular, I've been having dozens and dozens of conversations with prospects, with our existing customers at SearchPilot, and just around the market with folks I know and my contacts. And in that, there have been certain themes that have been coming up over and over again. And in particular, two things I'm hearing on the SEO side. One is folks have been having their engineering resources cut. So engineering resources allocated to SEO have been reduced. Hear that from tons of companies. So if you're hearing that, you're not alone. And very closely tied to this is that I'm hearing we're being asked to do more with less. So we're being given less budget, less headcount, less engineering, less agency spend, but our targets haven't changed, our goals haven't changed. We're still being asked to achieve those same things. So if this is familiar to you, hopefully we're going to find some ways to work through all of this together. So first, I'm going to talk about some approaches that I found useful in dealing with these problems. Now, this is very much from first-hand experience. In my experience running Search Pilot, and my job today is not to talk a ton about Search Pilot. You'll get some of that in the breakout if you're interested. But this is very much from the experience of getting budget for SEO testing, getting budget with SEO testing, or getting budget to continue SEO testing. And so some big things that I've been using for this, big pillars. One is moving fast and proving your worth. Nobody has any patience. Your executive team are not prepared to wait as long as they would have been in the past for those results to come in, and they're more skeptical. They want the proof. That your CFO is asking for efficiencies. You know, I just mentioned this, being asked to do more with less. And so how do we get those efficiencies that the CFOs want? And remembering that loss aversion is your friend in this kind of market more than ever. And what I mean by that, and I'll explain this in more detail, but is this psychological thing that's going on with us as humans, which is that we fear loss much more than we desire gain. And so finding ways to use that loss aversion in your budget pitches, in your discussions, is a very powerful tool, especially in a market like this. As I said, I'm coming at this from an SEO testing angle. So when we're working at Search Pilot, we're building these SEO testing programs for our customers. And that involves having these individual on-site changes that are well encapsulated. And each change then gets a bunch of data about the performance of that change and the SEO impact that it has. And we can connect that to the business outcome. And so if you want to know more about how this works, we'll get onto that a little bit later in the breakout. But what it means for the purposes of this bit of the conversation is that the cool thing is we get these dashboards. So we get the ability to have individual line items in our dashboards, which are individual on-site initiatives. And each one comes with its confidence interval, its expected uplift, and we can tie this to the business metrics as well. Sorry, some of this has to be anonymized and redacted because this is a real snapshot of an actual customer dashboard. And so if you do want to know more about this, you can head over to searchpilot.com. Our website has tons more information. Or at the end of the webinar, so when I finish talking, we're going to hang around in this room and run some Q&A. And as Heather mentioned, my colleague Emily is going to be in the breakout room, and she's going to be talking about how SEO testing works. And so I'm not going to get into the weeds of how to run SEO tests, but Emily's going to cover how they work, how to run them, how we analyze them, and how we think about that at Search Pilot. So if you want that, you can head over to the breakout room after this talk. But in the meantime, let's focus in on the executive buy-in side of things. So I'm going to talk about it, as I said, from the context of securing budgets for testing and protecting budgets with testing. But I hope it's useful to even folks who aren't testing. But I hope that many of you are already running any SEO tests of one form or another. Okay, so let's run through these three things as promised. So the first one, move fast and prove your worth. This is particularly relevant in a world of testing because there is a misconception, in my opinion, that testing can slow you down and that these two things are in tension. And I actually think of it less as being a tension and more of it being almost a dial that you can move back and forth. So you can rotate this dial to more certain if you want to, or you can rotate this dial towards faster. And this kind of metaphorical dial is just decisions that you make about how you're going to treat your test results, how you're going to treat your initiatives and your experiments, and what you're going to do with the data that comes out of those. And so you can pivot this all the way over to really certain if you need to. And this is what, if you're running the kind of gold standard double-blind trial for some new drug, healthcare industry, well away from the world of SEO, you're going to go right over to as certain as possible. And this is where you're saying we want 99.9% statistical confidence, and we want to be really putting very tight bounds around the knowledge that we're getting out of these tests and these experiments. Or you can flip it over kind of the other way and move it much more towards fast. And my argument is that in these kind of economic times that we're talking about, this is more the direction that you want to go in. And the way that the language we use around this at Search Pilot in particular is we talk about default to deploy So this is the idea that if you've got a good idea, you want to get it out there as long as there's no adverse data coming your way. And I talk a lot about the fact that we're doing business, not science. So we're much more interested in beating our competition than we are in, we're not publishing academic papers or trying to get to that nth degree of statistical confidence. And so what we're basically talking about here is building this decision matrix. So this is like the first big tip, is to build this and communicate it around your organization, and do it in such a way that you get buy-in from around the team of what are we going to do in these different situations. And you can have different decisions in different places. So you can have your ideas, your hypotheses are going to fall somewhere on this spectrum from, this is pretty much a pure experiment. We have no idea which way this might go, through to we have a very strong hypothesis that we believe we know what's going to happen here. And we have things that are very expensive through to things that are cheap. And so this kind of bottom left quadrant, where we have a weak hypothesis and it's an expensive change, that's where we might want to require fairly high degree of statistical confidence, even in this default to deploy world. And then in the middle kind of quadrants, we can build out whatever rules we want around this. This is just an example of our mindset on a kind of default project with our customers. And when you're up in this upper right quadrant, where you've got a cheap, easy to make change and a very strong hypothesis, this is where we default to deploy. So this is where we say we're going to deploy this as long as it's not trending down. So even if it's neutral, even if we can't exactly quantify the benefit of this change, we're going to push this one out anyway because we believe in it, and we have a strong hypothesis, and it's cheap to maintain. But my point is, this is not the only choice for this quadrant and this layout. You can make different decisions in these quadrants. So one example might be, if you really want to ramp that dial over to moving fast, you can just require a little bit of confidence in the expensive weak hypothesis quadrant. You can default to deploy in the other two middle quadrants, and you can just ship it, not even run the experiment if you want to, in the top right quadrant. And so my point is really, this is situational, and that this is what you need to build an agreed process, an agreed methodology that you're going to use with your team itself, but also with your leadership team, your executive team, to get the ability to move fast while still giving them data that they feel is valuable to them and that proves the value of the initiatives that you're running on. Okay, into the second tip. This is around driving the efficiencies that CFOs want. Again, specifically with an SEO testing program, but you can modify this for different kind of varieties of SEO or different kinds of approaches. So where I'm starting from here is that you've got a ton of work to do, right? Everybody has a big long backlog of things that they would like to do that they hope are going to make a big difference and are going to move the needle on their site or for their customers. And so each of these orange boxes here is a piece of work. So some of the bits of work are bigger, some are smaller, and fundamentally we're going to work through these things and ship all of them over time, we hope. This is what happens without testing. When we're able to run an SEO testing program in the way that we approach it at SearchPilot, which is very much SEO team led. So the point of our platform is that it enables the team itself to do self-service testing and not have to rely on the engineering team or the data team and so forth and so on. And this means that we can take all of those initiatives, every single one of these orange boxes, and we can test them. And what happens when we do that, of course, is that we discover that some of them, the pink ones in this example, are a bad idea. We had a good hypothesis, but it turns out this change is actually negative. It's actually going to damage the performance of our website. And so we definitely want to not do that thing. But there's more, because also those gray boxes are the ineffective ideas. These are the things that we hoped were going to be a good idea, but actually turns out don't move the needle. They're going to be worth avoiding because we can avoid the engineering team having to build them, to maintain them, and fundamentally focus on these green boxes, which is the things that do make a difference, right? The green boxes in this example are the ideas from our backlog that it turns out make a positive impact on our website. We put all of this together, and what that basically means is that just those set of green boxes contain all of the benefit that the orange bar did. And by communicating this to our leadership, to our engineering team, and to the wider org, we get to say, hey, you know what? This is us doing more with less. This is us being efficient and getting those results that the CFO wants, and actually even better results, because we've even cut out the pink, right? The bad ideas, those couple of ideas that had a decent hypothesis behind them, but for whatever reason, we shouldn't be doing them. And so at worst, it's the same result with less engineering, but actually it might even be a better result with less engineering. And this is the kind of argument that I think we can make to the CFO when we're being asked for efficiency gains. So that's the first two. The third is, I mentioned that loss aversion is super important in a market like this. And this is partly rational. You know, when times are tough, you maybe can't afford to take too many risks, to have too many downturns, to have things turn out worse than you'd hoped. And so partly this is rational, but partly this is, you know, lizard brain. This is the thing that somehow hardwired into the human psyche that means that we are much more excited about gains. Sorry, much more excited. We're much more worried about losses than we are excited about gains. And if we can tap into that psychological mindset, then we can make this whole thing work really well together. And so this is about building this quadrant that I talked about to emphasize that even in the purple areas, right, any of the areas that we're not really confident on, we're making sure that they're not trending down. And this is really hyper important, I think, and this is really at the crux of how to build a compelling case around this, because we've all probably, or anybody who's been in the industry for a long time, has probably had that experience where you do a thing that you hoped was going to work and it turns out way worse than you'd hoped. That sucks. No doubt about it. But the one good thing about it is that it tends to be obvious. When it comes out way worse than you'd hoped, you spot that mistake straight away, you get to remedy it, and you get to work on fixing it, and everybody is on the same page that this is something that needs fixing. The big risk, in my opinion, is what I've called the marginal losses. So you might have read about the theory of marginal gains, which is this idea that if you just improve by 1% every day, then you'll end up in a really great place. Marginal losses is the inverse of that same thing, that small drops, they compound, they add up. If you consistently have those little small problems and issues that knock a few percent off your organic search performance, then it's going to be a real headwind, a real drag, real friction on your SEO program as a whole. And the really pernicious thing about this is that they're hard to spot. If you deploy a change that is minus 20% organic traffic, you're going to spot that mistake and you're going to reverse it and you're going to deal with it. If you have something that's minus 2% or minus 3%, it can be incredibly hard to tease out and spot that difference and to differentiate it from seasonality, site-wide changes, Google algorithm updates, changes your competitors made, all of these kind of dynamics that are going on in the wider market that have nothing to do with you are reasons why your traffic fluctuates by that much week in, week out anyway. And so it's incredibly hard to spot those kind of issues without a kind of all-encompassing SEO testing program, which is where we focus on these things. But our argument to the executive team is kind of saying, look, if we're not able to run these tests, we may not spot these. There will be no way of spotting these minus 2%, minus 3% things. And the real damage is that they add up and they compound, and we end up with this big drag on our overall SEO program performance. So that puts those three together. That's some of my tips within an SEO testing context for moving fast, proving your worth, driving efficiencies, and using loss aversion in your benefit. So I wanted to also today talk about some more general tips for securing budgets. So less related to SEO testing, not even related to SEO directly necessarily, but just from the fact that I've been running a business now for almost 20 years. And as I said at the beginning, doing it through some tough times. But these budgets are, executive teams think about this in kind of similar ways across many different sizes of business. So I've got a couple of more general tips. The first is it can be very easy to fall into a mindset of kind of fatalism around this, thinking that large spends are impossible to justify and that you're never going to get sign off for a budget that size, right? And I hear this again and again, especially from junior folks or folks earlier in their career, or just who've had too many negative experiences around this, of kind of saying, look, I really want to do this big thing, but it's going to cost hundreds of thousands of dollars. There's no way the business is going to sign off on that. And I think this is generally a misconception in most businesses. There are tons of things that businesses spend huge amounts of money on, starting with your salaries, that they are excited to do and that they do more of quarter in, quarter out. And so I think trying to avoid this mistake is a key part of putting a powerful budget request together. And so I like to draw the analogy here to playing high-level poker. Now, I haven't played high-level poker. I've lost some money at low-level poker, but my understanding is that the pros train themselves to think about chips as kind of abstract concepts, more so than if they just had that stack of dollars in front of them at the table, and that they're training themselves to make the right call no matter how much each chip is worth. So they want to play the same way, whether it's a 10-cent chip, a dollar chip, a $100 chip. And business is very much the same. One of my kind of foundational experiences early in my career was being handed a business model spreadsheet to make some updates to while the partner was away on vacation, and realizing that it was denominated in hundreds of millions of dollars. And I'd had experience of building spreadsheets denominated in dollars, but I'd never done one denominated in hundreds of millions of dollars. But that realization that the spreadsheet is the same. The spreadsheet is the same no matter how many zeros are on the end. And the business cases are often kind of similar. And there's another example of this that is kind of more practical and I guess closer to my day-to-day experience these days is when I'm running Search Pilot or previously running Distilled. We're a small business in the grand scheme of things, dozens of people. And even in that context, I've signed off on HubSpot spends in the tens of thousands of dollars, right? And I remember one $40,000 contract that we signed with HubSpot at one point. And that's for a tool that can make us a bit better at keeping track of what's going on and hopefully sell some more, right? Which is very important. But you think about that spend, that's in a business of a few dozen people spending tens of thousands of dollars. If you're in an organization with hundreds of people, thousands of people, tens of millions, hundreds of millions, or billions of dollars of revenue, these spends are happening all the time. And folks are signing off on 6-figure, 7-figure contracts and spends. And so making sure that we don't fall into that kind of negative mindset of thinking that it's impossible to get a big pitch through. And this is very important in SEO world to think of it in fully loaded budget terms. And this was me asking a provocative question on Twitter, deliberately with no context. And just to say, I really liked Eric's example here of an $18 million SEO budget. I've heard of much bigger as well. But what's important to remember is this is not the budget for Screaming Frog or your rank tracking tool or your keyword analytics tool. This is everything. This is the salaries of the folks on the team. This is it's them plus the engineers who are going to work on the requests and the backlog, the product folks, the data team. And that's before you get to agency spend, tool spend, data spend. All of these kinds of things add up. And so you need to make sure you're thinking in a fully loaded budget sense. And I just think this makes a huge difference. If you think of your SEO budget as being what you spend on your agency, then it might be really hard to imagine pitching a $100,000 project for something. But if you think of your spend as being all of the salaries on the internal team, the engineering team, the product team, the data team, and the agency spend and the tool spend, and oftentimes that's then going to be in the millions, it becomes much, much easier to get yourself in a mindset of saying, I can easily make a pitch for spending this next incremental 100,000 or whatever it might be. So that's one mistake that I see folks make. Conversely, I see folks make the opposite mistake, which is thinking that it's enough to just give some vague articulation of why it would be a nice idea to do this project or make this spend. And this is kind of saying, if the first argument is saying, don't compare company money to your own budgets, just the fact that this money you're talking about is the cost of a car or a house deposit or, whatever, doesn't mean that a business might not do it. The second mistake is kind of saying, okay, but people are treating this seriously. This is a real professional environment. And we do need to make an argument related to a business case about why this should happen. And so I think the really critical thing here is to tie it to actual business goals. And typically that means tying it to money somehow, but also tying it to the mission of the business, the goals and the objectives that that business is working towards right now. And my best tip for this is to really listen to what your CEO and your executive team are saying in public and internally, but especially in public. And especially if you're a public company, reading the formal filings, right, the 10K and so forth, listening to the earnings calls is a really powerful way to figure out what's on the CEO's mind. And what's on the CEO's mind is going to be what's on the SVP's mind as well, if they're worth their while. And by aligning with their language, with their priorities, with their goals, you get to, it's like a cheat code for unlocking big business opportunities and big pitches for your budget. And I think alongside that, it's also worth remembering, especially, as I said, if you're new to making these kind of pitches or putting these kind of budget requests together, it's worth remembering the importance of our channel. We are so lucky to work in organic search, to work in SEO, which is for almost every business I've ever worked with at a large scale, the single biggest channel for new business, new customers in particular, that they have. Doesn't matter how much they're spending on paid search, doesn't matter how much they're spending on advertising, doesn't matter how much they are, how good their social media is or whatever else. The vast majority of businesses that I've worked with at scale get the majority of their new business and their new website visitors from organic search. This is an estimate, this is from the outside in, of Nike.com. This is from SimilarWeb, showing that, as you can see, of the new acquisition channels, organic search dominates. And remember that this gives you the opportunity to build a powerful business case, and that you're working in a team and in a channel that is strategically important, and finding ways to make that case to companies that don't get it, and hopefully workplaces that do get it, and hook your budget requests and your budget ideas onto that idea of, actually, we're coming from a position of importance here, and we don't need to be shy about that. And the best teams are confident in the value they can deliver to the business. So final tip in this little section is to remember, if I have one kind of practical tip here, is that certainty of outcome trumps size of outcome when you're putting a business case together. So you don't necessarily want to start with the headline of, this is going to be the biggest thing the company has ever done. You really want to tie it to very believable outcomes and find ways that are going to be believable to all of the stakeholders who are going to read this, whether it's your marketing leadership, whether it's your senior executive team, whether it's your CFO, and tie it to times you've done it before, evidence that it's going to work, all of those kind of things. That's where you need to put the hard yards in my experience. Okay, final section of the me talking at you bit before we get to Q&A and the breakout room and all the rest of it is specifically how I think about structuring business cases, specifically for SEO testing, which is what I've been working on for the last 6 or 7 years. So I like to think of building these cases up in something of a hierarchy, a little bit of a kind of almost a pyramid of a business case. And we start with that last point that I just ended on of certainty trumps size of outcome. And so we start with, as confident as we can be, the ways that this investment pays for itself. And hopefully you can apply this to other areas of SEO or even broader digital marketing. As I say, my context is coming from it, thinking about SEO testing. But step one is, how do we get this initiative to pay for itself with a very high degree of confidence as quickly as possible? And one way that we do that is that we de-risk the whole project with some quick wins. So we find the list of most desired backlog items that the business has wanted to get done and hasn't been able to get it done, and find the way that our initiative can get those done early in the engagement. And I don't know who on this call is working in-house, but if you are in-house, especially at a bigger established organization, you probably have that desk drawer with the last half dozen agency SEO audits in it. You did some of those things, but there's this backlog of stuff that you wish you could have got done and you haven't been able to achieve just yet. So we build the project around de-risking the whole thing by getting those quick wins with a high degree of confidence as early as possible. And then we build on top of that a business case in efficiency gains. And this is exactly what I was talking about in the previous section. So this is like, okay, we're going to get all the same upside of the things that you were looking to do, even better than that because of the avoiding those losses. And we're going to do that in a very efficient way. So we're going to be able to make less of a demand on engineering. Our typical example here is that we expect this to be 20 or 25% of the engineering requests. 20 to 25% of the initiatives, when they're tested, are going to turn out to be positive things that we really want to roll out. We layer on top of that the loss avoidance stuff, right? So we get the safety and the security in knowing that we're going to spot if there's something that we wanted to do that would have been a -2% or -3%, -5%, and we feel confident, we feel safe, and we feel like that is a really strong intangible benefit, obviously added to the tangible benefit that we're often able to say things like, just if we just avoid 2 losses, that would justify the whole program. And so again, we're focusing on those high confidence outcomes and the high probability of success. And it's only then, on the very top of this pyramid, that we get to put the icing on the cake and talk about the big wins and the huge ROI. The cherry on the icing on the cake is when we get to say, and some of the biggest wins we've seen have been as big as X, Y, and Z. That would be worth this many dollars in your particular business, in your particular example. And that's where you can get kind of the folks who are going to work on the program get excited by that, right? The direct team can be very excited by that. Whereas this is actually in some sense the less exciting bit for the CFO, who might have heard this a million times over and is like, sure, there's a version here that makes an extra $100 million, but I don't quite believe that. But they're happy. They're signing off on the program because they're very sure it's going to pay for itself. It's got a direct path in highly believable route to ROI, and along the way, it's going to be safer. Their job security is kind of helped by the fact that you're not going to have any of these losses and any of these kind of damaging times. And so this works for everyone. It gets the team excited, it gets the CFO on board, and it unlocks those budgets. And that then is what lets the team do the actual real hard and important work. And I haven't really talked at all here today about what an SEO program looks like, what the work done by an SEO team looks like, or even what these backlog of SEO testing ideas might be. But that's where the magic happens. And all of this work is about getting people out of their own way, getting organizations to do the things in their self-interest, because actually SEO is their biggest channel. Organic search is their biggest channel. SEO is their biggest incremental ROI opportunity. And this is a phenomenal approach to doing that. And as we put all this together, we get that final piece of excitement where we get to say, we can now do more innovative things. We can, our competitors might be scared to make a particular kind of change to their website, but because we're testing, we can do that thing. We can run it as a small scale test. We can get the evidence that says it's not damaging, and in fact, it's this big uplift. Or some of them turns out it would have been a bad idea, and we can avoid that big downside and keep rolling. And yeah, that's where we get into in actually building out the exciting part, right? Building out the SEO program that works and putting all the pieces together. So I hope that's been useful. Just very quick recap. What we've talked about here today is those kind of 3 things where I was getting the idea of how I think we, in a tough economic time, need to build, need to have our mindset in terms of proving the value, justifying the budget. And that was moving fast and proving your worth, drive the efficiencies that your CFO wants, and avoid the losses. We talked about some general tips for budgeting around not being scared of big dollar amounts, not being worried that large spends are impossible to justify, but also not falling into the trap of thinking that vague justifications are sufficient. And we've had some specific tips for all these things. And then finally, this structure that I like for putting together an actual budget request or an actual business case. So what we're going to do now is right here, we're going to do some Q&A. And I can see there's been some questions coming in. I haven't been watching the channel. There's also, I should say, there's the handouts tab as well. And if you want to flip over to there, you can get a couple of resources that are useful in terms of how we think about SEO split testing at Search Pilot, and also some examples. So 8 winning SEO A/B tests that are useful for inspiration and ideas of things that you can be working on. But while we do Q&A here, Emily, as I said, my colleague, VP of Customer Success at Search Pilot, and one of the most experienced people in the world of running and managing these SEO testing programs, is going to be doing a more detailed dive into actually how does SEO testing work and how do we think about it at Search Pilot. So you can go over and join her if you want to learn more about that and get a bit more of a handle on the practicalities of the actual testing program. And you can stay here if you want to ask me any questions or follow up with hearing what others have to ask. So head to the breakout room, which should have popped up on your screen if you want to learn more about how SEO testing works, and stay here if you want to ask me some questions. Thank you.
Will, do you want to try turning your camera back on just to see if we can? Otherwise, we can just.
Yeah, my internet's normally rock solid, and I am wired in, so hopefully things will be better now.
Yeah, and anytime we did the test, it was all fine too. So, all right, so that was some awesome stuff. Thank you very much. It does look like we've seen some people head over into the breakout room. We've got that team over there. So, all right, let's stay here and see what we can do. So Caleb had a question. With so many moving parts in a large e-commerce business, do you have tips in improving direct ROI to execs?
Tips for proving it. Yeah. So this is exactly what we've been working on. And it's why I've dedicated this bit of my career to Search Pilot. So to give you some context, the business that we started back in 2005 was called Distilled. That was an SEO agency. And we ended up growing that to having teams working in the UK and the US. We work with a lot of e-commerce folks. And we came up against exactly what you're talking about. The two biggest challenges we saw were challenges in getting things done. So we or the client would have an idea of something we wanted to do, but it would be tough to kind of ferry it through all of the steps of process that it would have to go through before it hit the live website. And obviously until it has, it's not going to have any benefit. But relevant to this, the second big challenge was exactly what you highlighted. How do you prove that specific thing was valuable? And that is exactly what the challenge we're trying to solve at Search Pilot. And we're attacking it with SEO split testing. And as Emily's talking about exactly how that works, but at a very high level, what that means is that we are running controlled experiments. So we're able to take an on-site change, a particular idea or hypothesis, and say, we're going to roll that out on some pages. So in e-commerce land, this is normally some PDP pages or some PLP. And so it's either the product listing pages or the product detail pages. We're going to make that change to just some of those pages and then apply some statistical analysis to figure out how have those pages changed in performance, not in an absolute sense, but compared to the pages we didn't change, the control pages. And that's what lets us get those charts that I was showing off our website. And you can dive deeper into it over there. And we found that as you educate the organization into learning to read those charts and learning to trust that data, that is exactly how you get that proof point that says, hey, we did this thing and it was plus 3%. We did this thing and it was plus 6%. And you can stack up those things. It does require that one extra level of education, which is to say, you can't always add those things together and say, that means we're up 15% because we had these three things that add up to that much. Just because these are versus the status quo. So these are how much better off are you than you would have been had you done nothing. But of course, during that time, your competitors are doing things. Google is doing things. There's seasonality going on. So you're doing it within the context of, we may be way better off than if we hadn't done these things. We might be even further ahead if those have been tailwinds. We might be not quite as far ahead as that makes it sound if we've instead faced some headwinds in either algorithm changes or competitor actions or whatever else it might mean. But I hope that helps.
Okay, so question from Irvi. While pitching SEO budgets as our audience is broad and they're not well versed in SEO organic, which key points would you recommend to include in our presentations when they're convincing their top leaders?
Yeah, so it sounds like the context of where that question is coming from is very much in an organization where a lot of folks are not necessarily experts in the channel or experts in the the operations of what it is you're going to do and why you're going to do it. And I actually really like, well, so there's two things. I think over the long term, I really like educating those folks. I think a lot of people are curious. A lot of senior executives are, I mean, they're smart, motivated, engaged people. They're perfectly capable of learning this stuff. And a lot of them are very interested to do so. The budget pitch is not the time and place to do that. But that's just an aside that I think over time, giving them the information that they can learn is very valuable. A lot of them will really engage with that. In the actual budget process itself, my thinking is much more to talk in broader terms about the size and opportunity of the channel. So I think what folks can understand, even if they're not experts in the channel, is like that slide I showed of the Nike.com breakdown. And as I said, that was from the outside looking in from SimilarWeb data, because they're not, Nike's not a customer of ours just yet. But if you're working inside the organization, you have that actual data. So starting with that scene setting, that context of saying, hey, senior leadership, did you know that we get 33% of our new customers from organic search? Did you know that Y% of those are folks who don't land on the homepage? They're not making branded searches. They're searching more generally for the products or the services that we offer. And just that little bit of education at the beginning sets that scene, sets that context. And then you start. So my movement would be, here's how important the channel is, and here's the scale of the opportunity of the channel. And here is the kind of current size of the investment. So here's the team that you have working on these things. Here's the kind of investment you're making. Here's the incremental investment that we're talking about pitching here. And back to the structure that I talked about here, that's when I would build up with that, like, here's our certainty of payoff, like this will pay for itself. Here's our highly confident ROI pitch. And here's the cherry on top. Here's how well this could go, and how much of a hero we might all look if we get towards the top end of our goals here.
Perfect. I don't know why there's like a delay in the mute button. It takes it a second to come off. Okay.
Keeps on it.
Yeah. So for anyone, if you're having an issue getting into the breakout room, Christina can move you manually. Just let us know in the chat. But there is room over there, so you should be able to get in. Okay, so Arya asks, how do you convince leaders that the ROI, and you might, I think you probably did touch on this, but I'm sorry. How can you convince leaders of the ROI obtained from organic SEO that it can be more profitable in the long term than putting budget towards paid? So I'm sorry, you did not talk through that.
Yeah, so specifically versus paid search. So I think this is not to knock paid search. I'm a big fan of paid search, and at Search Pilot, we spend money on Google Ads and all the rest of it. But they are such different things. And I think one of the things that I found helpful in, again, educating senior leadership around this is your paid search spend is more like the rent that you pay. If you want to place a physical store, right? If you're a retailer, you want to place your physical store on Fifth Avenue in Manhattan, you're going to spend an awful lot of money to do that. It's going to be very expensive, and you're going to have to pay that every single month, every single quarter that you want to be there. You're going to have to pay that money, and that may well be worth it to your business, and it can bring some highly valuable visitors into your store, and you're going to sell them a lot of stuff. That's the same thing that's going on with paid search. You're paying Google, the landlord, to be in this highly trafficked, highly footfall area of the internet, which is where folks are looking for the service that you offer. SEO, in contrast, is not like that. SEO is more like an investment. It's more like, and this is speaking the language of some senior executives, more like CapEx versus OpEx. So if you're used to those kind of financial terms, OpEx is operating expenditure, like rent. CapEx is capital expenditure, like building an asset. And SEO done right is building an asset. There are many, many organizations out there that could do nothing directly for SEO, and they would continue to get organic search traffic for years to come. And and we see this in some sectors and some verticals. And it's where the cynics come into play when you read about SEO on kind of especially a lot of tech forums, right? A lot of engineering forums will kind of say, oh, but I just put up a website and people are finding it in organic search anyway. I haven't done any SEO, and of course that's true. And this is the nuance and the challenge of building these business cases. Is your SEO business case needs to be about the incremental performance, right? Not about the traffic you would have got anyway if you did nothing. It's about what you're going to get because you do this thing. That's the hard part. The good news is that do that thing right, and it's going to pay dividends for years to come. This is not about saying, look, we spent $10,000 in a month and got $10,000 of or $30,000 of benefit in that month. It's about saying, look, we did this work this year that is going to mean that we have a better performance, certainly over the next year, probably over the next 2 or 3 years, maybe even over the next 5 years. And depending on how your planning horizons and your budget thinking, there's often we often end up making like 2-year business cases, because there's very often the case in SEO where you're like, the results are going to start accruing by like month 9 of year 1, but they're going to definitely stick around to the end of year 2, if not into year 3. And those numbers can sometimes stack up like really hugely in your favor. But I like using that language of CapEx versus OpEx, rental versus asset building, because those are the mindsets of business leaders when they're putting together that dynamic in their mind.
So I think that's a really good segue into Melanie's question, because you talked about, it could be longer term than what you're looking at. So she asks how to convey ROI when SEO doesn't majorly win new customers, but it's rather useful for recruiting, for business development, and for presence. So, and those are things that, we all know how much fun it is to try to, track awareness and report back on that. So yeah.
For sure. I think so. I am mainly coming from the context. Most of the folks that we work with these days at Search Pilot, just the nature of what we do, they tend to be quite transactional websites. So we are working with e-commerce, real estate, jobs, travel, those kind of verticals where the big wins are the website revenue, right? You sell more flights, you sell more widgets, whatever it is that your e-commerce store sells. But of course, you're right that there's tons of other benefits. And back in my consulting days, definitely worked with tons in like B2B and in other areas where you're, as you say, it can be about brand perception, it can be about recruitment, it can be about all of those kinds of other things. I think what I would say is all the same principles apply. You just need to ask maybe 1 or 2 more whys. Why does the business care about this? And you're going to be able to tie it to business metrics. And so recruitment's a great example of this. And you go and speak to your HR or recruitment partner in your business, and you'll be able to figure out. They'll hopefully, if you're in a collaborative environment, they'll be able to talk to you about how many folks, how often do they end up hiring from an inbound applicant versus spending on a contingent fee external recruiter, for example. Right? And they're expensive. I don't know who here, small business owners will have had the experience of, 20%, 25% of salary can go on a contingent fee recruiter, even more in New York City or for senior executives. And so that's a big chunk of change. And if you can say, look, because we're ranking in these kind of areas, we're getting our brand out in these kind of ways, we can see that mix changing, and more of our applicants are coming through our inbound pipeline versus having to be headhunted or use external contingent fee recruiters. You can just build a business case the exact same way. And so it is the same. It's just hard. It's the same with brand perception. You just have to ask, why do we care? Is it conversion rate? Is it revenue growth? Is it CEO not getting fired? Like whatever it is, there's some reason why people care about these things, and you have to hook into those. And I would go back to my tip about listening to the 10K, listening to the earnings calls, reading the 10K. Bonus tip: ChatGPT is pretty good at summarizing earnings calls and things like 10K. So you can dump the text in or dump the transcript in and then interrogate it, ask questions and say, what are the 5 biggest priorities here? What's the language that the CEO keeps repeating? How are they thinking about goals around recruitment or around brand or whatever it might be? tie it to those priorities, and you'll get the budget unlocked.
All right, I think we've got time for one more question. Let's see. So Matthew asks, what is your process for structuring SEO testing? What specifically are you testing, and how do you structure it? Like what results do you measure?
So we come at it specifically from trying to tie it to the business results as much as possible. So we are typically measuring the statistical outcomes based on organic traffic changes. And we do that because rather than rankings, for example, because it's the more holistic metric. So the two big problems with rankings, and I've written a post about this that I'm sure we can dig out and send in the links, is one problem is you can't track every ranking. So you the kind of universe of the full long tail of everything that everybody is searching for is too big to track everything, and Search Console data is not good enough. And so firstly, if you're trying to track that, you're going to be missing some things. Secondly, it doesn't track click-through rate changes. And one of the big things that we've learned over the last few years is SEO misses a trick when it doesn't focus on click-through rate from organic search. PPC has known this forever, right? PPC colleagues, a huge part of the job is optimizing click-through rate, or certainly was pre-machine learning stuff. And on the organic search front, again, huge benefits there. So you miss that if you're not tracking, if you're only tracking rankings. So we look at traffic. We sometimes are working what we call full funnel testing, which takes it all the way to conversion rate and to revenue. The big reason why we often look at that, but don't necessarily see that as our primary metric, is just that in many businesses, conversions being so much more sparse than traffic, right? So a 1%, 2% conversion rate just means there's too much noise in the conversion rate data to be able to measure the organic search performance with the high enough sensitivity that we need. So we're often looking at organic traffic. And then you asked about how do we build out that kind of the program holistically. So it's a combination of brainstorming our side and working with most of our customers have in-house teams and sometimes agency partners in the mix as well. And it's almost anything that would go into a regular SEO strategy development can be a brainstorming source for an SEO testing program. So whether it's competitor research, whether it's site audit, whether it's coming from best practices and looking at what Google has said or whatever else, any of these things can be sources of ideas. And then we're trying to classify them into those kind of quadrants that I was talking about in terms of how confident are we that this is going to be a good idea? How expensive is it going to be for us to design and maintain this feature? And then from there, we're rolling out the testing program as well. And so I think, yeah, you kind of put those pieces together, and we're essentially trying to build the best SEO strategy we can, layered into having that. You remember that kind of orange bar I had? The kind of plan is, okay, we've got this backlog of things that we in a vacuum, we would just do these things sequentially, but we're going to turn them into a testing program. And the final piece of the puzzle, and I did allude to this earlier, is there are things that sometimes you can do only because you're running a testing program. And those are the big swings, the riskier bets, the things that, I've had tons of situations where there are things that if I was a consultant, which, as I said, I have been in the past, I wouldn't have dared suggest that our clients did certain things. Whereas in a search pilot world, when what I'm actually suggesting is we test a thing, you can be way more out there. And that brings not only the opportunity for those big victories, but also a source of competitive advantage, because you know that your competitors who are slower moving, who are not running those tests, are not able to even think about trying out to see whether that thing would work. So I hope I've answered your question. There were a couple of different parts to it, but yeah, I hope that's been valuable.
I think that was very valuable. Well, we're at time, Will, so we're going to have to let these people get back to like their day jobs, you too. But before we let you go, big thanks for you being here, and for Emily, hosting the breakout room. Tell the people where to find you.
Yeah, so thank you everyone for joining. Sorry about the little technical difficulty at the beginning. Hopefully the audio held up throughout, and it's been a great pleasure from my side. So thank you for joining. If you have specific direct follow-ups, you can email me. I'm will.critchlow@searchpilot.com. And I'm pretty easy to find on social media at Will Critchlow on most things. So drop me a LinkedIn message or a Twitter DM if you need. And the one kind of call to action, I guess, is searchpilot.com is the home for everything SearchPilot related. And in particular, we have a newsletter, which is the resource that I wish had existed when I was an SEO consultant. Every 2 weeks, we publish a result of a specific SEO test, along with details of the outcome, positive, negative, neutral, whatever. And as I say, I wish I'd had that when I was consulting. It's the next best thing to running your own tests. If obviously my primary recommendation is you run your own tests, but if you're in B2B or a smaller environment or you don't have those resources, the next best thing is learning from others. So that's as I say, we're building it because we wish it had existed previously. And you can find me in any of those places and look forward to, I'm always up for geeking out about anything from SEO, particularly robots.txt, through to the intricacies of CapEx and OpEx. So just hit me up.
Awesome. All right, well, we threw that link in there. Why is it? And then, yeah, with that, why is it? Oh, sorry. It's doing something funky with your email for some reason. All right, let's see. All right, Will. Well, it'll be in the recap email. You guys will all have, there it goes. You guys will all have the slides, full presentation, and any of the links. So we'll get that in your inbox today. Thank you all for being here, and we'll see you on the next SEJ webinar. Have a good day. Bye. Thanks, Will.
Thank you.